In the 12th year after Aegon's conquest, on the black volcanic island of Dragonstone, a child was born who would one day make the realm bleed. His name was Maegor, and from his first breath, he was different. The labor was long and brutal. Queen Visenya Targaryen, oldest of the 3 dragon riders who had conquered Westeros, screamed through the night as Maesters hurried between the birthing chamber and the rookery. Some whispered that the child did not want to come into the world. Others said he was too eager, tearing his way free. When the babe finally emerged, covered in blood and wailing with terrible fury, the midwives looked upon him with unease. He was large for a newborn, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold more rage than any infant should possess. King Aegon, the Conqueror himself, waited outside the chamber, his face unreadable as stone. When the doors opened and a Maester brought word that both mother and child lived, Aegon nodded once. He did not smile. He walked into the room, looked down at his second son, and after a long silence, he spoke. "He will be strong," the Conqueror said. Nothing more. Visenya held the child to her breast and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had won something precious through pain. She had given Aegon his heir years before, a gentle boy named Aenys, who was now 12 years old. But Aenys was soft. Aenys was weak. Aenys cried when his dragon egg did not hatch in his cradle, and he grew pale and sickly when his father flew off to war. Visenya loved her stepson in her own way, but she did not respect him. Now she had her own son, a true son, a warrior born. From the moment Maegor could walk, he did so with purpose. While Aenys played with wooden toys and read histories in the library, Maegor grabbed whatever he could find and swung it like a weapon. He struck servants. He kicked dogs. He did not cry when he fell. By the time he was 5 years old, he demanded a real sword. And when the Master-at-Arms refused, Maegor took a training blade and broke the man's nose. Aegon heard of this and did nothing. Visenya heard of this and smiled. The 2 princes could not have been more different. Aenys was tall and thin, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He wrote poetry. He loved music. He wanted to be loved in return. Maegor was broad even as a boy, with a square jaw and a cold stare that made grown men uncomfortable. He did not care for songs or stories. He cared for strength. He cared for victory. He cared for nothing else. The Masters noted these differences in their journals. The courtiers whispered about them in the halls of Dragonstone, and across the narrow sea, in the free cities and the distant lands of Essos, men who traded with the Targaryens heard the rumors. Aegon, the Conqueror, has 2 sons, they said. One is made of silk, the other is made of steel and spite. When Maegor was 8 years old, something happened that sealed his fate. Aenys, now 20 and newly married to Alyssa Balerion, visited Dragonstone with his bride. It was meant to be a celebration, a union of 2 great houses. But during a feast in the great hall, a minor lord from the Crownlands made a joke. He said that perhaps Aenys should give his crown to his younger brother, since Maegor looked more like a king than he ever would. The hall fell silent. Aenys laughed nervously, trying to ease the tension. Maegor did not laugh. He stood, walked to the lord, and without a word, smashed his cup into the man's face. Blood poured. Teeth scattered across the stone floor. Guards rushed forward, but Visenya raised her hand. "Let him be," she said. Aegon said nothing. He simply watched his younger son with those unreadable eyes. That night, Visenya took Maegor to the dragon caves beneath the castle. The smell of sulfur and smoke filled the air. The heat was overwhelming. Deep in the darkness, something stirred. A great shadow moved, and then two enormous eyes opened, glowing like coals in the black. Balerion the Black Dread, the largest dragon in the world, the beast that Aegon himself had ridden during the conquest, lifted his head and looked at the boy before him. Maegor did not flinch. He did not run. He stared back. "Your father rode him to victory," Visenya said quietly. "One day, he will be yours." The dragon exhaled, and the gust of hot breath nearly knocked Maegor backward. But still, the boy did not move, and deep in those terrible eyes, something like recognition flickered. Balerion lowered his head. Maegor reached out and touched the beast's scales. They were warm as a forge and hard as iron. The boy smiled. It was his mother's smile. Over the next few years, Maegor visited Balerion every day. He brought the dragon meat. He spoke to the beast in High Valyrian, the ancient language of the dragon lords, and slowly, impossibly, the bond formed. By the time Maegor was 13, he had claimed Balerion as his own. Aegon no longer flew. The conquest was over, and the conqueror was growing old. Some said he was tired. Others said he was simply content to let the past remain the past. But Maegor did not care about the past. He cared about the future. And now he had the greatest weapon in the world beneath him. Aenys, meanwhile, had taken the throne. Aegon the Conqueror died in the 37th year after his landing, and the crown passed to his eldest son without dispute. The realm expected strong leadership. They expected the fire and decisiveness of the conqueror. What they got was hesitation. Aenys was kind. He wanted peace. He listened to his lords and made compromises. He sought to win hearts, not break them. And the realm, sensing weakness, began to stir. The Faith of the Seven, which had bent the knee to Aegon only because they feared his dragons, saw their chance. They denounced the Targaryen practice of marrying brother to sister as an abomination. They called the dragons unnatural. They preached that the gods had turned their faces away from Westeros because of the sins of the dragon lords, and Aenys, desperate to be loved, tried to appease them. Maegor watched all of this from Dragonstone. He was 16 now, fully grown and terrifying to behold. He stood taller than most men, with a warrior's body earned through endless training. He wore his silver hair long, like his father had. His eyes, the purple of old Valyria, showed no mercy and no doubt. When word reached him that the faith was rising against his brother, Maegor laughed, not with joy, but with contempt. "He invites rebellion with every kindness," Maegor told his mother. Visenya nodded. She had seen this coming. She had warned Aegon before he died that Aenys was too soft to hold the throne. But Aegon had followed the law. The eldest son inherits, and now the realm would pay for that tradition. It was during this time of growing tension that Maegor was brought to the Red Keep in King's Landing. Aenys needed his brother close. He needed the strength that Maegor represented, the unspoken threat to anyone who might consider open revolt. And so Maegor came, riding Balerion across the skies, casting an enormous shadow over the city below. The small folk looked up in terror and wonder. Some cheered, others prayed. All of them remembered that once, not so long ago, this same dragon had burned armies to ash. Maegor landed in the courtyard of the Red Keep, and when he dismounted, he did not bow to his brother. He simply looked at him. Aenys smiled weakly and embraced Maegor, thanking him for coming. Maegor said nothing. He did not need to. His presence spoke louder than words. That night, Visenya arrived as well, though she came by ship rather than by wing. She was older now, her face lined with age, but her eyes were still sharp as Valyrian steel. She met with Aenys in private, and though no one knows exactly what was said, the result was clear. Maegor would remain in King's Landing. He would serve as a reminder of the Targaryen power. He would be the sword when Aenys tried to be the olive branch. It was a compromise that satisfied no one, but it was the best the weak king could manage. The young prince took to his role with grim efficiency. He trained in the yards every morning, defeating every knight who dared face him. He sat in on council meetings, his arms crossed, his face a mask of disdain as lords argued over taxes and grain supplies. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words cut through the endless debate like a knife. "Do this," he would say, "or kill them," and the room would fall silent. Aenys would cough nervously and try to soften his brother's suggestions, but everyone in that chamber knew the truth. Maegor was the real power in the room. Maegor was the one they feared, and fear was the only language some men understood. In the streets of King's Landing, the faith grew bolder. Septonnus preached against the Targaryens in broad daylight. Poor fellows, the humble warrior, order of the faith, began to gather in greater numbers. Warriors' sons, the knightly order sworn to protect the faith, rode through the city in gleaming armor, their rainbow cloaks a direct challenge to the three-headed dragon. They did not attack, not yet, but the threat was there, hanging in the air like smoke before a fire. Aenys tried to negotiate. He sent envoys to the High Septon. He offered concessions. He promised to respect the faith's authority in matters of marriage and morality. And the faith, smelling blood, demanded more. Maegor watched all of this with growing disgust. One evening, as Aenys paced the throne room in worry, Maegor spoke. "Give me 100 men," he said. "I will ride to the great sept of Baelor and burn it to the ground. I will hang every septon from the walls. This will end." Aenys turned pale. "You cannot be serious," he said. "They are holy men. The realm would never forgive such an act." Maegor's expression did not change. "The realm will forgive anything if you are strong enough to make them," he replied. Aenys shook his head and dismissed the idea entirely. That night, Maegor told his mother what had been said. Visenya did not disagree with her son, but she knew the time was not yet right. "Patience," she told him. "Your brother's weakness will create your opportunity. Wait for it." The opportunity came sooner than anyone expected. In the year 37 AC, Aenys made a decision that would shatter the fragile peace. He allowed his eldest son, Prince Aegon, to marry his daughter Rhaena, brother to sister, the old Valyrian custom that the faith despised above all else. It was not cruelty or ambition that drove Aenys to this choice. It was love. Aegon and Rhaena adored each other. They had been inseparable since childhood. And Aenys, in his gentle heart, believed that love should triumph over politics. He believed the realm would accept it if he simply showed them how pure the union was. He was wrong. The faith exploded in outrage. The High Septon declared the marriage an abomination. He denounced Aenys as a tyrant and a sinner. And then, for the first time in decades, the Faith Militant took up arms. The poor fellows rose in the streets. The warriors' sons rode out from their chapter houses, and across the 7 kingdoms, the fires of rebellion began to burn. Aenys panicked. He sent ravens demanding loyalty. He called his banners. But many lords, fearing the wrath of the faith, hesitated. Some refused outright. Others sent only token forces. The king's authority was crumbling, and everyone could see it. In desperation, Aenys turned to the one person he knew could save him, his brother. "Help me," Aenys begged. "I need you. The realm needs you." Maegor looked at his brother for a long moment, and then he nodded. Not out of love, not out of loyalty, but because he saw what Visenya had promised him, the opportunity to be what Aenys could never be, a king who ruled through fear, not affection, a dragon in truth, not just in name. "I will help you," Maegor said. "But when this is done, you will remember who saved your throne." And with that, the prince born in blood prepared for war. Maegor Targaryen became a man in fire and blood, and the realm would never forget it. When the Faith Militant rose in open rebellion against King Aenys, it was Maegor who answered with steel. He gathered what loyal forces remained in King's Landing, mounted Balerion, and flew to meet the enemy. His first target was a group of poor fellows who had seized a sept near Maidenpool, declaring it a fortress of the faithful. They numbered nearly 300 men, armed with axes and hammers and crude swords. They sang hymns as they barricaded the doors. They believed their faith would protect them. They believed the gods would shield them from dragonfire. They were wrong. Maegor circled once, letting them see the shadow of Balerion block out the sun. Then he gave the command. The dragon descended, jaws opening, and the world turned to flame. The sept did not just burn, it melted. Stone cracked and collapsed. The screams lasted only moments before they were swallowed by the roar of fire. When Maegor landed afterward, nothing remained but ash and blackened bone. He did not speak. He did not need to. He mounted Balerion once more and flew to the next target. By the end of that week, 4 more septs had been reduced to ruins. The message was clear. Faith would not save you from a dragon. But this was only the beginning of Maegor's legend. Word of the burnings spread across the 7 kingdoms, like wildfire itself. Some lords were horrified. Others were quietly relieved. The faith had grown too powerful, too bold. Someone needed to remind them that the Targaryens held the true power in Westeros, and Maegor was more than willing to be that reminder. He flew from the Riverlands to the Reach, from the Stormlands to the Westerlands, hunting down bands of warriors' sons and poor fellows wherever they gathered. He did not take prisoners. He did not offer mercy. He simply burned them all. Yet even as Maegor fought his brother's war, Aenys remained paralyzed with indecision. The king sent ravens pleading for peace. He offered pardons to rebels who would lay down their arms. He tried to negotiate with the High Septon, promising reforms and compromises. And the faith, seeing this weakness, only grew bolder. They declared Aenys a false king. They called for all true believers to rise against the dragon. And in castles and holdfasts across the realm, lords began to choose sides. Some stayed loyal to the Iron Throne. Others joined the faith. And still others simply waited, watching to see which way the wind would blow. It was during this chaos that Maegor made a decision that would change everything. He took a second wife. Her name was Alice Harroway, daughter of Lord Lucas Harroway, a powerful lord of the Riverlands. She was beautiful, with dark hair and darker eyes, and she was ambitious. Lord Harroway saw in Maegor a path to greater power, and Maegor saw in Alice something his first wife had failed to give him, a son. Maegor had been married for years to Cerys Hightower, a match arranged by his father, Aegon the Conqueror, to bind the Targaryens to one of the wealthiest and most powerful houses in the Reach. But Cerys's womb remained empty. Year after year, no child came. Some whispered that the gods had cursed the union. Others said Cerys was barren. Maegor did not care about whispers. He cared about results. And if one wife could not give him an heir, he would take another. The marriage was performed in secret, in a small ceremony on Dragonstone. Only Visenya and a handful of loyal servants attended. When word reached King's Landing, Aenys was furious, not because he cared about Cerys's honor, but because he understood what this meant. The faith taught that marriage was sacred, a bond between one man and one woman, blessed by the seven. To take a second wife, while the first still lived, was not just scandal. It was heresy. And Maegor had just handed the faith a perfect weapon to use against House Targaryen. Aenys summoned his brother to the Red Keep immediately. The meeting was private, but servants listening at the door reported that the king's voice shook with rage and fear. "You have doomed us all," Aenys shouted. "The faith will never forgive this. They will turn every lord in the realm against us. You must set Alice aside. You must beg forgiveness." Maegor's response was cold and final. "I will set aside no one," he said, "and I will beg nothing from men who kneel to statues and sing songs to invisible gods. If they want war, I will give them war." Aenys stared at his brother, realizing in that moment that Maegor was beyond his control. Perhaps he always had been. The High Septon wasted no time. He declared Maegor's second marriage a sin and an abomination. He excommunicated the prince, stating that Maegor Targaryen was no longer welcome in any sept in Westeros. His soul was forfeit, his name was cursed, and any man who followed him would share his damnation. It was a powerful condemnation, one that should have isolated Maegor completely. But the prince did not flinch. Instead, he flew to Harrenhal, the massive ruined castle that Lord Harroway now held, and there he consummated his marriage publicly, in full view of the assembled lords of the Riverlands. It was a direct challenge, a middle finger to the faith, and it worked. Some lords were disgusted, but others admired his courage. Maegor was not afraid of priests or prayers. He was a dragon, and dragons did not bow. Yet even dragons can be hurt. The Faith Militant grew bolder after Maegor's excommunication. They began ambushing Targaryen supporters on the roads. They burned the homes of lords who spoke in favor of the crown. And in the streets of King's Landing itself, poor fellows attacked anyone wearing Targaryen colors. Aenys, watching his kingdom spiral into chaos, fell ill. The Maesters said it was a fever, but everyone knew the truth. The king was dying of weakness and fear. He could not hold the realm together. He could not fight the faith, and he could not control his brother. In desperation, Aenys made his final mistake. He ordered Maegor into exile. The decree came in the form of a royal proclamation. Maegor was to leave Westeros immediately and not return until the king commanded it. If he refused, he would be declared a traitor and an enemy of the crown. It was meant to appease the faith, to show that Aenys was willing to punish his own blood for the sake of peace. but it accomplished nothing. The Faith was not satisfied. They wanted Maegor's head, not his absence. And Maegor, reading the proclamation in the hall of Harrenhal, simply laughed. "My brother is a fool," he said to Alice, "but he is still my brother. I will go, for now." Maegor flew east across the narrow sea, taking Alice with him. They landed in Pentos, one of the free cities, a place where Westerosi laws and Westerosi gods held no power. The Pentoshi magisters welcomed the exiled prince with open arms. They had heard of his deeds, they knew his reputation, and they offered him employment as a sellsword captain, leading armies in the endless trade wars that plagued the free cities. Maegor accepted, not because he needed the gold, but because he needed to stay sharp. War was his craft, blood was his language, and he would not let himself grow soft in exile. For 3 years, Maegor fought across Essos. He led armies against Myr and Tyrosh. He burned fields and sacked cities. He became a legend among the sellsword companies, a man who never retreated and never showed mercy. The Pentoshi paid him well, but it was not gold that Maegor sought. It was purpose. He trained every day. He studied tactics and strategy. He learned the languages and customs of Essos. And all the while, he watched the horizon, waiting for news from Westeros, waiting for the moment when his weak brother would finally fall. That moment came sooner than expected. In the year 42 AC, a raven arrived in Pentos, bearing terrible news. King Enis was dead. The official report said he had succumbed to illness, his body racked with fever and cramps. But darker rumors spread. Some said he had been poisoned. Others claimed he had simply given up, his heart unable to bear the weight of failure. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The Iron Throne was empty, and the realm was bleeding. Aenys left behind 6 children. His eldest son, Prince Aegon, should have inherited the crown. He was 22 years old, married to his sister Rhaena, and he had a daughter of his own. By all the laws of gods and men, Aegon was the rightful king. But Aegon was in the Westerlands when his father died, far from the capital, surrounded by enemies. The Faith Militant still hunted him for his incestuous marriage. Half the realm wanted him dead. And in King's Landing, chaos reigned. The small council argued about what to do. Some wanted to summon Prince Aegon immediately. Others feared that doing so would only invite more bloodshed. And while they debated, precious days slipped away. Maegor did not waste time debating. When he heard of his brother's death, he went to his wife Alice and told her to prepare for departure. "We are going home," he said. Alice smiled. She had been waiting for this moment. In her mind, she would soon be queen. Maegor mounted Balerion, and with Alice secured behind him, they flew west across the narrow sea. The flight took only a day, a journey that would have taken weeks by ship. And when the great black dragon appeared in the skies above Dragonstone, Queen Visenya was waiting. She stood on the battlements, her white hair whipping in the wind, and she watched her son descend like a dark god from the clouds. When Maegor dismounted, Visenya embraced him. "Your time has come," she said. "Take what is yours." But claiming the throne would not be simple. Prince Aegon still lived. He had supporters, and there were lords throughout the realm who believed in the law of succession, who thought that the eldest son of the eldest son should inherit, no matter how dangerous or inconvenient that might be. Maegor cared nothing for their beliefs. He had spent years in exile while his brother destroyed everything their father had built. He had fought wars while Aenys cowered in his castle. And now, with the realm on the brink of collapse, Maegor would do what Aenys never could. He would be strong, he would be ruthless, and he would rule. Within days, Maegor flew to King's Landing. He did not ask for permission. He did not send ravens announcing his intentions. He simply arrived, landing Balerion in the courtyard of the Red Keep, while the small council was still in session. The lords looked up in shock and terror as the massive dragon settled onto the stones, its eyes glowing like coals. Maegor dismounted, his armor dark as midnight, his sword, Dark Sister, hanging at his side. That blade had belonged to Visenya during the conquest. She had given it to her son when he left for exile, and now he wore it like a promise of violence. Maegor walked into the throne room without ceremony. He climbed the steps of the Iron Throne, turned, and sat. The lords of the small council stared in stunned silence. One brave soul, an elderly lord whose name has been lost to history, dared to speak. "Prince Maegor," he said carefully, "the crown belongs to Prince Aegon. He is the rightful heir. You cannot simply take—" Maegor cut him off. "My nephew is a boy hunted by the Faith," Maegor said. "He cannot hold this throne. I can, and I will." The Lord opened his mouth to protest further, but Maegor's hand moved to Dark Sister, and the words died in the old man's throat. No one else spoke. They simply bowed their heads. And in that moment, without a single drop of blood spilled, Maegor became king. But the realm would not accept his rule so easily. News of Maegor's coronation spread quickly, and the reactions were swift and violent. The Faith declared him a usurper and a tyrant. They called on all true believers to rise against him. Lords who had stayed loyal to Aenys now questioned whether they could serve a man who had stolen the throne from his nephew. And in the Westerlands, Prince Aegon, upon hearing what his uncle had done, proclaimed himself the true king and began gathering an army. The realm was about to be torn apart by civil war, and Maegor, seated on the Iron Throne with a cold smile, welcomed it. He had been forged in violence. He had been born for this. And now, finally, he would show Westeros what a true Targaryen king looked like. The reign of Maegor the Cruel had begun. The first challenge to Maegor's rule came not from armies or assassins, but from the gods themselves, or so the Faith claimed. Within a week of Maegor's coronation, the High Septon issued a proclamation that shook the Seven Kingdoms. He declared Maegor Targaryen anathema, a creature cursed by the gods and unfit to rule. Any man who served him, the High Septon proclaimed, would be damned for all eternity. Any knight who bent the knee to the usurper would lose his honor. Any lord who paid taxes to the Iron Throne would share in Maegor's sins. It was the most severe condemnation the Faith could issue, and it had real power. In a realm where nearly everyone worshipped the Seven, such words carried weight. Lords who might have accepted Maegor's rule out of fear now hesitated. Knights who had sworn oaths to the crown began to question those vows. And in the streets of every city, from Old Town to White Harbor, the small folk whispered that the gods themselves had turned against the Dragon King. Maegor's response was swift and terrible. He declared that any Septon who spoke against the crown would be executed. Any warrior's son or poor fellow found within King's Landing would be hanged from the city walls. And any sept that refused to open its doors to Targaryen soldiers would be burned to the ground. The Faith had made this a holy war. Maegor would show them that dragons cared nothing for holiness. But words alone would not win this conflict. The Faith Militant was not some distant threat. They were here now, armed and dangerous. The warriors' sons rode through the countryside in force, attacking tax collectors and Targaryen loyalists. The poor fellows formed mobs in towns and villages, overwhelming local garrisons and declaring those places sanctuaries of the faith. And in the shadows, silent assassins worked to end Maegor's reign before it truly began. 3 times in the first month, men tried to kill the king. Once, a servant slipped poison into his wine. Maegor smelled it before he drank and had the man tortured until he revealed who had paid him. It was a septon from the great sept of Baelor. Maegor had the septon brought to the Red Keep, and in front of the assembled court, he fed the man the same poison. It took hours for the septon to die, and his screams echoed through the halls. No one attempted to poison the king again. The second attempt came from a Kingsguard knight, a man who had served Aenys and could not stomach serving his usurper brother. The knight drew his sword during a council meeting and lunged at Maegor. He was fast, well-trained, and desperate. But Maegor was faster. He caught the blade with his bare hand, letting it cut deep into his palm, and with his other hand drew Darksister and opened the knight's throat in one smooth motion. Blood sprayed across the council table. The other lords sat frozen, too terrified to move. Maegor looked at his wounded hand, watched the blood drip onto the floor, and then calmly wrapped it in cloth. "Does anyone else wish to test me?" he asked. No one answered. The dead knight was dragged away, and the meeting continued as if nothing had happened. The third attempt was more subtle. A washerwoman in the Red Keep, a young girl who washed the king's sheets and clothing, was found with a vial of basilisk venom hidden in her apron. She confessed under torture that she had planned to coat Maegor's clothing with the poison, knowing that it would seep through his skin and kill him slowly over days. When asked who had given her the venom, she named a septor who worked in the city's orphanages. Maegor had both women executed, along with every other septor in King's Landing. It was brutal, it was excessive, but it was effective. The assassination attempts stopped. Yet even as Maegor secured his position in the capital, his nephew refused to surrender. Prince Aegon, the son Aenys had loved and hoped would one day rule, gathered his forces in the Westerlands. He had the support of several powerful houses, including the Lannisters, who had never truly accepted Maegor's claim. Aegon also had something else. He had a dragon. Quicksilver was young and small compared to Balerion, barely a quarter of the Black Dread's size. But it was still a dragon, and dragons were the ultimate weapons of war. With Quicksilver at his side, Prince Aegon believed he could challenge his uncle and reclaim his birthright. He was wrong, but he believed it nonetheless. The two forces met near the God's Eye, the great lake in the Riverlands. It was not meant to be a battle. It was meant to be a negotiation. Maegor had sent ravens to his nephew, offering terms. Aegon could bend the knee, renounce his claim, and live out his days in comfort on Dragonstone. He could keep his wife, his daughter, and his dignity. All he had to do was accept that Maegor was king. It was a generous offer, more generous than most expected from a man called Cruel. But Aegon refused. He sent back a message written in his own hand. "I am the rightful king," it said. "You are a usurper, and a kinslayer in waiting. I will not kneel." Maegor read the message and smiled. "So be it," he said. The battle that followed was not truly a battle at all. It was a slaughter. Maegor flew Balerion high into the sky, circling above the lake while Aegon rode Quicksilver to meet him. The young prince was brave. There was no denying that. He urged his dragon upward toward the monstrous shadow that blotted out the sun. Quicksilver shrieked and breathed fire, a bright jet of flame that would have incinerated any normal foe. But Balerion was no normal foe. The Black Dread had burned entire armies. He had ended the line of kings, and now he would end the line of Aegon, the Conqueror's grandchildren. Balerion descended like a falling star. He was 3 times Quicksilver's size, his jaws large enough to swallow a horse whole. He crashed into the smaller dragon with the force of an avalanche, his teeth closing around Quicksilver's neck. The young dragon screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed across the lake. Wings tangled, claws raked, blood sprayed through the air, black and red mingling as the 2 beasts fell from the sky. They hit the water with a tremendous splash, and for a moment, everything disappeared beneath the surface. Then Balerion rose, shaking water from his scales. Quicksilver's broken body still clamped in his jaws. Prince Aegon was nowhere to be seen. He had fallen during the descent, his body crushed on impact with the lake or drowned beneath the weight of his dying dragon. Either way, he was gone. Maegor circled once, looking down at the wreckage, and then flew back to shore. The army that Aegon had gathered watched in stunned horror as their prince's dragon sank beneath the dark waters of the God's Eye. Some men fled immediately. Others fell to their knees and begged for mercy. A few tried to fight, but they were quickly cut down by Maegor's soldiers. By the end of the day, the rebellion was over. Prince Aegon was dead. His supporters were scattered or captured, and Maegor's claim to the throne was no longer in question. But the Faith Militant did not surrender. If anything, Aegon's death only made them more determined. The High Septon declared that the gods had taken the young prince into their embrace, sparing him from the horrors of living in a world ruled by the cursed usurper. He called on every believer to take up arms. He promised that those who died fighting Maegor would be granted eternal paradise. And across the realm, desperate men listened. They believed, and they marched to war. The worst of the fighting took place in the Riverlands and the Reach, where the faith had always been strongest. Poor fellows attacked Targaryen supply lines, burning wagons and killing merchants. Warriors' sons rode out to meet the king's armies in open battle, their rainbow cloaks bright against the mud and blood of the battlefield. They were brave. They were well trained. But they were still just men. And men, no matter how faithful, could not stand against dragonfire. Maegor hunted them relentlessly. He would receive reports of a gathering of poor fellows in some village or town, and he would fly there immediately. Balerion would descend, the great dragon's shadow falling over the terrified believers, and then the fire would come. Entire villages burned. Fields turned to ash. The survivors, those few who were not killed outright, were rounded up and executed. Maegor did not take prisoners. He did not offer mercy. He wanted the faith to understand that there was no escape, no sanctuary, no hope. There was only submission or death. The lords of the realm watched this campaign of terror with mixed emotions. Some were relieved. The faith had grown too powerful. too bold. Someone needed to remind them that temporal power rested with the crown, not the church. But others were horrified. These were not soldiers being killed. These were small folk, farmers and craftsmen and shopkeepers who had taken up crude weapons in the name of their gods. Burning them alive seemed excessive, even by the brutal standards of Westeros. But no one dared speak against the king. Maegor had made it clear that questioning his methods was the same as questioning his rule, and questioning his rule meant death. It was during this bloody campaign that Maegor made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He needed more than dragons to hold the realm. He needed heirs, sons to continue his line and ensure that the throne would pass to his blood, not to some distant nephew or cousin. But his wife, Cerys Hightower, remained barren, and his second wife, Alice Harroway, though younger and fertile in theory, had also failed to produce a child. Maegor began to suspect that the problem was not with his wives, but with himself. Perhaps the gods truly had cursed him. Perhaps his seed was poisoned. Or perhaps, he thought darkly, someone was ensuring that no child would ever be born. His suspicions fell on Cerys first. She had never forgiven him for taking Alice as a second wife. She lived in the Red Keep like a ghost, pale and silent, her eyes filled with hatred whenever she looked at her husband. Maegor confronted her one night in her chambers. "Have you been taking moon tea?" he demanded. Moon tea was a common potion used by women to prevent pregnancy, brewed by maesters and midwives throughout the realm. Cerys stared at him with cold fury. "I have taken nothing," she said. "If your seed does not quicken in me, perhaps you should consider that the fault lies with you, not with your wives." Maegor struck her. It was not a calculated blow, but one born of rage and frustration. Cerys fell to the floor, blood trickling from her split lip, and she looked up at him with something close to satisfaction. "You can beat me," she said quietly. "You can kill me, but you will never have a son." Maegor left her chambers without another word, but her words haunted him. That night, he sought out his mother, Visenya. The old queen still lived, though age had finally begun to slow her. Her hair was white as snow, her face lined and weathered, but her mind remained sharp. Maegor told her of his fears. Visenya listened in silence, and when he finished, she nodded slowly. "You need more wives," she said simply. "2 have failed. Take more. Cast a wider net. Sooner or later, one of them will give you what you need." It was cold logic, practical and ruthless. It was also illegal by the laws of the faith and offensive to every tradition in Westeros. But Maegor did not care about laws or traditions. He cared about results. And so, in a move that shocked even his most loyal supporters, Maegor took a third wife. Her name was Tyanna of the Tower, and she was unlike any woman in Westeros. She came from Pentos, a sorceress and rumored poisoner who had served Maegor during his exile. She was beautiful in a dangerous way, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to see through lies. Some said she practiced the dark arts, brewing potions and casting spells in her chambers. Others claimed she could read minds and see the future. Maegor did not care if the rumors were true. He cared that Tyanna was intelligent, ruthless, and utterly loyal to him. She had proven her worth in Essos, helping him win battles and eliminate rivals. Now she would help him secure his dynasty. The marriage took place in secret, in the old Valyrian tradition, with only Visenya and a handful of trusted servants present. When word spread through King's Landing that the king had taken a third wife, and a foreign sorceress at that, the reaction was immediate and furious. The Faith denounced Maegor yet again, calling him a servant of dark powers and a disgrace to the Iron Throne. Lords who had reluctantly accepted his rule began to waver, and in the streets the small folk muttered that the gods would surely punish such wickedness. Maegor's response was to take even more wives. Within the year, he married Jane Westerling and Eleanor Costaigne, both daughters of powerful Westerlands houses. And in a move that stunned the entire realm, he also married Rhaena Targaryen, the widow of his nephew Aegon. Rhaena was beautiful, intelligent, and dragon rider, bonded to Dreamfire. She was also deeply traumatized by her husband's death and terrified of Maegor. But she had no choice. The king commanded, and she obeyed. With 6 wives now in his household, Maegor waited for the sons he so desperately needed. But the months passed, and still no children came. Not from Cerise, not from Alice, not from Tyanna, not from Jane, not from Eleanor, and not from Rhaena. The beds remained empty of heirs, and Maegor's frustration turned to rage. Someone, he decided, was sabotaging him. Someone was preventing these children from being born, and he would find out who, no matter how much blood it took. The realm trembled as Maegor the Cruel tightened his grip on power, his eyes burning with suspicion and his heart growing colder with each passing day. The war against the Faith Militant consumed the realm like a fever that would not break. For 5 long years, Maegor hunted the warriors of the E7 with a hatred that seemed to burn hotter with each passing season. He offered a gold dragon for the head of any warrior's son and a silver stag for the head of any poor fellow. The small folk, desperate and starving after years of war, took up the offer with grim enthusiasm. Brothers turned on brothers. Fathers betrayed sons. The faithful were dragged from their homes and beheaded in the streets, their heads delivered to royal garrisons for payment. It was a policy of terror, and it worked. Slowly, bloodily, the Faith Militant began to crumble. But the faithful did not go quietly. They fought like cornered wolves, striking from the shadows and vanishing before Maegor's soldiers could respond. They poisoned wells. They burned grain stores. They assassinated tax collectors and murdered lords who had sworn loyalty to the Iron Throne. In the Reach, a group of poor fellows managed to seize the sept at Stonebridge and held it for 3 months, turning it into a fortress. They preached from its walls that Maegor was the stranger in human form, death incarnate, sent to test the faith of true believers. When Maegor finally arrived on Balerion, he did not bother with a siege. He simply burned the sept to the ground, with all the poor fellows still inside. The structure was ancient, built of white stone that had stood for centuries. It melted like wax beneath dragon fire. The screams of the dying could be heard for miles. After Stonebridge, the rebellion began to lose momentum. The Faith Militant had believed that their righteousness would protect them, that the gods would intervene on their behalf. But the gods did not come, and Balerion did. One by one, the strongholds of the faith fell. The great chapter houses of the warriors' sons were stormed, and their knights put to the sword. The hidden camps of the poor fellows were discovered and burned. And through it all, Maegor showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. He wanted the faith broken, not just defeated. He wanted them to remember this pain for generations. The cost was staggering. Thousands died. Entire regions were left in ruins. The Riverlands, which had seen the worst of the fighting, became a wasteland of burned villages and mass graves. Refugees fled to the cities, overwhelming them with hungry mouths and desperate pleas. Disease followed. First came the bloody flux, which killed hundreds in King's Landing alone. Then came the shaking sickness, which left survivors weak and trembling for months afterward. The Maesters did what they could, but there was not enough food, not enough medicine, not enough hope. The realm was bleeding itself dry, and still Maegor would not stop. In the midst of this carnage, the question of an heir became increasingly urgent. Maegor now had 6 wives, but not one of them had given him a living child. Alyce Harroway had come closest. In the 3rd year of Maegor's reign, she announced that she was with child. The king was overjoyed. He showered her with gifts and attention. He ordered the maesters to attend her constantly. He had her chambers moved closer to his own so he could visit her every night. For months, her belly swelled, and the court whispered that finally, the gods had relented. An heir was coming. The succession would be secured. But when the time came for the birth, something went horribly wrong. The labor lasted 2 days. Alyce screamed until her voice gave out, and still the child would not come. The masters worked desperately, trying every technique they knew, but nothing helped. Finally, they cut the babe from her womb. What they pulled out was not a child. It was a monster. The masters who were present refused to speak of it in detail afterward, but the rumors that spread through the Red Keep were nightmarish. Some said the thing had scales instead of skin. Others claimed it had wings, or too many limbs, or no face at all. Whatever the truth, the creature was dead, and Alyce Harroway died shortly after from blood loss and fever. Maegor looked upon the twisted corpse of his would-be son and said nothing. He simply walked away, his face a mask of stone. But inside, rage boiled. Someone had done this. Someone had poisoned his child, twisted it in the womb, turned it into an abomination. Maegor was certain of it. He questioned the maesters, the midwives, the servants who had attended Alyce. Under torture, one of the servants confessed that she had seen a woman in dark robes visiting Alyce's chambers late at night. She could not identify the woman, but she remembered the smell. Bitter herbs and something else, something sharp and chemical, moon tea perhaps, or something worse. Maegor's suspicions immediately turned to his other wives. One of them, jealous and desperate, had murdered his child to prevent a rival from giving him an heir. He started with Cerys Hightower. She was the first wife, the one who had been most humiliated by Maegor's subsequent marriages. She had motive, she had opportunity, and when Maegor confronted her, she did not deny her hatred. "I hope it hurt," she told him, her voice cold as winter. "I hope you felt every moment of that child's death." Maegor wanted to kill her right then, to wrap his hands around her throat and squeeze until the life left her eyes. But something stopped him. Cerys was a Hightower, and House Hightower was one of the most powerful in the realm. Killing her without proof would turn the Reach against him completely. So instead, he had her confined to her chambers under guard. She would live, but she would live as a prisoner. Next, he turned to Tyanna of the Tower. The sorceress had always been the most mysterious of his wives, and many at court feared her. Rumors swirled that she brewed potions in secret, that she whispered to shadows that she knew things no mortal should know. Maegor summoned her to his chambers and demanded the truth. Had she poisoned Alice? Had she killed his son? Tyanna looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes and smiled. "I did not kill your son, my king," she said softly, "but I know who did." Maegor grabbed her by the throat. "Tell me," he snarled. Tyanna's smile did not fade. "It was Alice herself," she said. "She was unfaithful. The child was not yours. She knew you would discover the truth when it was born, so she took a potion to end its life before it could reveal her betrayal." Maegor released her, his mind reeling. Could it be true? Had Alice betrayed him? Tyanna saw his doubt and pressed her advantage. "I have proof," she said. "Let me show you." She led him to a hidden chamber beneath the Red Keep, a place he had never seen before. There, in jars and vials, she had collected evidence. Letters, she claimed, written by Alice to her lover. Strands of hair from a man who had visited her in secret. Even a piece of cloth stained with blood that Tyanna said proved the child's true parentage. Maegor looked at these things and felt his rage crystallize into certainty. Alice had betrayed him. She had lain with another man and tried to pass the bastard off as his heir. And for that, her entire house would pay. Within a week, Maegor ordered the execution of every member of House Harroway he could find. Lord Lucas, Harroway, Alice's father, was dragged to King's Landing and tortured until he confessed to knowing of his daughter's adultery. Whether he actually knew or simply said what Maegor wanted to hear under the agony of the rack, no one could say. But the confession was enough. Lord Lucas was beheaded, along with his sons, his brothers, his cousins, and every male member of his house. The women were spared execution, but were sent to the Silent Sisters, forced to take vows of silence and spend the rest of their lives in service to the dead. The Harroway castle was torn down stone by stone, and the lands were given to a minor house loyal to the crown. Within a month, House Harroway had been erased from existence. But even this bloodletting did not ease Maegor's fury. If Alice had been unfaithful, could the same be true of his other wives? Could they all be conspiring against him, laughing behind his back while they took other men to their beds? The paranoia grew like a cancer in his mind. He began to watch his wives constantly, looking for signs of betrayal. He had servants spy on them. He questioned their handmaids and guards, and he grew colder, more distant, more cruel. Jane Westerling was the next to fall under suspicion. She was young and beautiful, and she had been seen speaking with a young knight in the castle gardens. It was an innocent conversation, nothing more than pleasantries exchanged in daylight with servants nearby. But to Maegor, it was proof of treason. He had the knight arrested and tortured. The man swore he had done nothing wrong, that he had never touched the queen, that he was loyal to the crown. Maegor did not believe him. He had the knight gelded and then hanged from the walls of the Red Keep as a warning. Jane, watching from her window, fainted. When she recovered, she was a broken woman. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking. Within 3 months, she was dead, wasted away to nothing. The masters called it a broken heart. Others whispered that she had poisoned herself to escape her husband's madness. Eleanor Costain fared little better. She had given Maegor no cause for suspicion, but that did not save her. In his growing paranoia, Maegor decided that all his wives were potential enemies. He had Eleanor confined to her chambers, just as he had done with Cerys. She was allowed no visitors, no correspondence, nothing but 4 walls and the slow passage of time. She lived this way for 2 years, growing pale and thin, her mind gradually unraveling from the isolation. Eventually, she too died, though whether from illness or despair, no one could say. Only 3 wives remained now. Cerys, locked away and filled with hatred. Rhaena, terrified and compliant, but clearly miserable. And Tyanna, who moved through the Red Keep like a shadow, always watching, always smiling that knowing smile. Maegor trusted none of them, but he trusted Tyanna most. She had given him answers when everyone else gave him only questions. She had shown him the truth about Alice, or so he believed, and so he kept her close, even as whispers spread through the court that the sorceress had bewitched the king, that she controlled him through dark magic, that she was the true power behind the throne. The war against the faith continued, but Maegor's heart was no longer fully in it. He still flew on Balerion. He still burned septs and executed rebels. But there was a mechanical quality to it now, as if he were going through the motions without real passion. What consumed him was the question of heirs. He needed a son. The throne needed a son. Without one, everything he had built would collapse the moment he died. His nephew, Jaehaerys, Aenys's younger son, was still alive, hiding with his sister, Alysanne, under the protection of loyalist lords. If Maegor died without an heir, Jaehaerys would claim the throne, and all of this, all the blood and fire and terror, would have been for nothing. In desperation, Maegor turned to darker methods. He consulted with warlocks from Korth, who claimed they could guarantee a male child through rituals and sacrifice. He brought in priests of R'hllor from Essos, who promised that their god could grant him the son he needed if he would only convert and worship the flames. He even allowed Tyanna to perform strange ceremonies in the black cells beneath the Red Keep, ceremonies involving blood and chanting and things that would have horrified the faith if they had known. But nothing worked. His remaining wives did not quicken. No children came. And Maegor began to wonder if Cerys had been right all along. Perhaps he truly was cursed. Perhaps the gods themselves had decreed that he would die without an heir, his line ending with him. The thought drove him to greater cruelties. He executed lords on the slightest suspicion of disloyalty. He raised taxes to crushing levels to pay for his armies and his construction projects. And speaking of construction, it was during this dark period that Maegor began his most infamous project. The Red Keep, the castle built by his father Aegon, was nearly complete. But Maegor wanted something more. He wanted a fortress within the fortress, a place where he could be truly safe from assassins and traitors. He ordered the construction of Maegor's Holdfast, a massive tower with walls thick enough to withstand dragonfire and passages so secret that only he would know their locations. Thousands of workers labored on the project for 3 years. They built chambers and corridors according to plans that Maegor changed constantly, ensuring that no one knew the full layout. Secret doors were installed. Hidden passages were carved into the walls. And when the work was finally complete, Maegor thanked the workers for their service. Then he had them all killed. Every stonemason, every carpenter, every labourer who had worked on the Holdfast was executed, their bodies thrown into the sea. Maegor wanted no one alive who knew the secrets of his fortress. The massacre shocked even his most loyal supporters. But by this point, No one dared protest. To question Maegor was to die, and so the realm stayed silent, swallowing its horror and its rage. But in that silence, rebellion was growing. Lords who had bent the knee out of fear were now planning in secret. The faith, though broken, still had followers who dreamed of vengeance. And in the shadows, Jaehaerys Targaryen waited, gathering supporters and preparing for the day when he would challenge his uncle for the throne. The reign of Maegor the Cruel was reaching its peak of terror. But every reign, no matter how brutal, must eventually come to an end. The Red Keep stood complete in the 5th year of Maegor's reign, a monument of red stone that dominated the skyline of King's Landing. But within its walls, Maegor's holdfast rose like a cancer, a fortress of paranoia and secrets. The king spent more and more time within its walls, emerging only to attend council meetings or to fly Balerion on missions of destruction. He trusted no one. He slept with Dark Sister beside his bed and guards posted outside every door. And still, he felt unsafe. The world, he believed, was full of enemies. Traitors lurked in every shadow. Assassins hid behind every smile. And his wives, those women who should have given him sons and security, had instead given him nothing but failure and suspicion. Tyanna of the Tower had become his constant companion. She advised him on matters of state. She whispered in his ear during council meetings. She shared his bed more often than any of his other wives. The court watched this with growing unease. Cerys Hightower remained locked in her chambers, a prisoner in all but name. Rhaena Targaryen moved through the castle like a ghost, her face pale and her eyes haunted. She spoke to no one unless spoken to, and she spent her days in the library or walking the battlements alone, staring out at the city below as if searching for escape. But there was no escape. Maegor had made that clear. She was his wife, his property, and she would remain so until death. It was Tyanna who first suggested what had been done to prevent Maegor from having children. They were alone in his chambers one night, the fire burning low, when she spoke. "My king," she said softly, "have you considered that the problem may not be with you or with your wives, but with something that was done to you?" Maegor looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" he demanded. Tyanna's dark eyes gleamed in the firelight. "There are potions," she said. "Spells, ways to ensure a man's seed never takes root. Someone close to you, someone who had access to your food or your wine, could have poisoned you years ago. The effects would be subtle, undetectable, but permanent." The idea took root in Maegor's mind like a weed. If Tyanna was right, if someone had poisoned him, then everything made sense. His failure to produce heirs was not a curse from the gods or a flaw in his own body. It was sabotage, murder of a kind more insidious than any blade. But who would dare? Tyanna suggested several possibilities. Perhaps a servant loyal to the faith, acting on orders from the High Septon. Perhaps a maester who feared what Maegor's dynasty would mean for the realm. Or perhaps, she said with careful emphasis, one of his wives, one of the women who lived in his own castle, who had the most to gain from his failure. Maegor's suspicions immediately turned to Cerys. She had hated him for years. She had openly wished for his death, and she had been with him the longest, with countless opportunities to slip poison into his cup. He confronted her the next day, storming into her chambers with guards at his back. Cerys sat by the window, her once beautiful face now gaunt and aged beyond her years. She looked at him with empty eyes. "Have you come to kill me at last?" she asked. Her voice was tired, defeated. Maegor grabbed her by the throat and lifted her from her chair. "Did you poison me?" he snarled. "Did you make me barren?" Cerese's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "I wish I had thought of it," she whispered. "But no, I did nothing. The gods cursed you all on their own." He threw her to the floor and left without another word. But he did not believe her. Whether she had done it or not, she had wished for it, and that was enough. Within the week, Cerys Hightower was dead. The official report said she died of a chill that had settled in her lungs. But the servants whispered that the king had ordered her smothered with a pillow. Others claimed Tiana had poisoned her with something slow and painful. Whatever the truth, Cerys was gone, and Maegor did not mourn. He had one less wife to worry about, one less potential traitor in his household. But Cerys's death did not ease his paranoia. If anything, it grew worse. Maegor began to see conspiracies everywhere. A lord who arrived late to court was plotting rebellion. A servant who spilled wine was attempting assassination. A master who suggested caution was secretly working for the faith. The dungeons of the Red Keep filled with prisoners, and the screams of the tortured became a nightly chorus. Confessions poured forth, true or not, as men and women said whatever they thought would end the pain. And based on these confessions, Maegor ordered more arrests, more executions, more blood. It was during this time that Rhaena Targaryen made her move. She had been patient, biding her time, waiting for the right moment. She knew she could not overpower Maegor. She knew she could not escape while he lived. But she also knew that his grip on the realm was weakening. Lords were abandoning him. The small folk hated him. Even his own household lived in terror. If someone were to challenge his rule, someone with a stronger claim and a kinder reputation, the realm might rally to them. And that someone existed. Her younger brother, Jaehaerys, Aenys' second son, was still alive. He was young, only 16 years old, but he was brave and intelligent and beloved by those who knew him. More importantly, he had a dragon. Vermithor, the great bronze beast, had bonded with Jaehaerys when he was barely 13. With a dragon and a rightful claim, Jaehaerys could challenge Maegor for the throne. Rhaena began to send secret messages. She used servants she trusted, men and women who hated Maegor as much as she did. The messages were hidden in bread loaves, stitched into clothing, written in code, and passed through a network of loyal conspirators. She told Jaehaerys everything: the state of Maegor's court, the king's growing madness, the weakness of his position. And she urged her brother to act. "The realm is ready," she wrote. "They wait only for someone to lead them. Come, brother. Come and take what is yours." Jaehaerys received these messages in the Reach, where he had been hiding under the protection of Lord Rowan of Golden Grove. The young prince read his sister's words and felt the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders. He did not want war. He did not want to kill his uncle, despite everything Maegor had done. But he also knew that the realm could not survive much longer under such tyranny. The Faith Militant was broken, but the peace that had replaced it was the peace of the graveyard. People lived in fear. They whispered behind closed doors. They prayed for deliverance. And Jaehaerys, raised to believe in duty and honor, knew what he had to do. He began to gather his forces, It was not difficult. Lords flocked to his banner, desperate for any alternative to Maegor's rule. The Reach rose almost as one, led by House Hightower, still furious over the treatment and death of Cerys. The Stormlands joined soon after, their lords remembering the days of Aegon the Conqueror with fondness and seeing in Jaehaerys a chance to return to those better times. Even some houses in the Westerlands and Riverlands, regions that had suffered terribly during the war with the Faith, sent men and supplies. Within months, Jaehaerys had an army. More importantly, he had hope. People believed in him. They saw him as a savior, the prince who would end the nightmare. Back in King's Landing, Maegor received reports of this growing rebellion with grim satisfaction. Finally, he thought, finally, a real enemy. Not shadows and whispers, but armies and banners. He could fight this. He could win this. He called his remaining loyal lords to the capital and began to prepare for war. But as the days passed and the ravens brought more news, even Maegor began to realize the depth of his problem. Lords he had counted on were not coming. Houses that had sworn oaths to him were suddenly silent. And worst of all, some of his own Kingsguard, those 7 knights sworn to protect him unto death, were looking at each other with doubt in their eyes. It was then that Tyanna made her final revelation. She came to him one evening as he sat brooding in his chambers, and she knelt before him with tears in her dark eyes. "My king," she said, her voice breaking, "I must confess something to you. I can no longer bear the weight of this secret." Maegor looked at her with sudden suspicion. "What secret?" he demanded. Tyanna took a breath. "I am the one who poisoned your children," she said. "I am the one who ensured that none of your wives would bear you living sons." The silence that followed was terrible. Maegor did not move. He did not speak. He simply stared at the woman before him, his mind struggling to comprehend what she had just said. Finally, in a voice like grinding stone, he asked, "Why?" Tyanna looked up at him, and now her tears seemed real, genuine. "Because I love you," she said. "Because I could not bear the thought of sharing you with a child. Because I wanted you to need me, to rely on me, to keep me close forever. I know it was wrong. I know it was monstrous, but I could not stop myself." Maegor rose from his chair. His hand went to Dark Sister, and he drew the blade in one smooth motion. Tyanna did not try to run. She did not beg for mercy. She simply closed her eyes and waited. "I gave you everything," Maegor said, his voice shaking with rage. "I trusted you. I believed you. You told me Alice was unfaithful. You told me others were plotting against me. Was any of it true?" Tyanna opened her eyes and smiled that strange, sad smile. "Some of it," she said. "But mostly, I told you what you wanted to hear, what you needed to believe, and you believed it all." He killed her then. Not quickly, not mercifully. He took his time, making her suffer as she had made him suffer. The servants who heard her screams that night would never forget them. And when it was over, when Tyanna of the tower lay dead in a pool of her own blood, Maegor stood over her body and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief, just emptiness. She had taken everything from him, his heirs, his future, his dynasty, and now she was gone, and there was no way to undo what she had done. In the days that followed, Maegor's behavior grew even more erratic. He executed servants at random. He raged at his council, accusing them of incompetence and cowardice. He flew Balerion over the city, circling for hours, as if searching for something he could not name. The court watched in horror, wondering if the king had finally lost his mind entirely, and in the dungeons, prisoners whispered that the gods had finally driven Maegor mad as punishment for his sins. Rhaena, watching all of this unfold, knew that the end was near. She sent one final message to Jaehaerys. "Come now," it said. "He is broken. The realm is ready. Come and claim your crown." Jaehaerys received the message and made his decision. He would march on King's Landing. He would face his uncle, and he would end this reign of terror once and for all. But before Jaehaerys could arrive, before the final battle could be fought, something unexpected happened. One morning, Maegor did not emerge from his chambers. His guards knocked and received no answer. They waited an hour, then two. Finally, fearing the worst, they broke down the door. What they found inside would become one of the great mysteries of Westerosi history. Maegor Targaryen sat upon a chair in his chambers, Dark Sister across his lap, his eyes open and staring at nothing. At first, the guards thought he was simply deep in thought. Then they realized he was not breathing. The king was dead, but there were no wounds on his body, no signs of poison, no indication of how he had died. He simply sat there, as if death had claimed him, while he contemplated his failures. The guards rushed to spread the word. Within hours, the entire Red Keep knew the tyrant was dead. The cruel king had fallen, and no one knew how or why. Some said the gods had struck him down. Others claimed the Iron Throne itself had killed him, that the swords that made up the seat had turned on their unworthy occupant and drained his life away. Still others whispered that Maegor had taken his own life, unable to bear the weight of what he had become. But the truth, if there was a truth, died with Maegor. And as the realm learned of his death, a great sigh of relief seemed to pass through the Seven Kingdoms. The nightmare was over. The tyrant was gone. And a new king, young Jaehaerys, was coming to heal the wounds and restore the peace. The reign of Maegor the Cruel had ended, but his legacy would haunt Westeros for generations to come. The rebellion against Maegor did not begin with trumpets and declarations. It began with silence. Lords who had once sent ravens pledging loyalty simply stopped writing. Tax collectors who rode into the countryside to collect the crown's due never returned. Knights who had sworn oaths to the Iron Throne quietly slipped away from King's Landing in the dead of night, abandoning their posts and their honor rather than serve the tyrant another day. The realm was not rising against Maegor all at once. It was simply turning away, withdrawing its consent, leaving him alone on his throne of swords. Maegor felt this isolation like a physical weight. The Red Keep, once filled with courtiers and petitioners, grew emptier each week. The throne room, where lords had once gathered to seek the king's judgment, stood silent except for the echo of Maegor's footsteps. Even the servants moved through the halls like ghosts, their eyes downcast, speaking only when spoken to. They feared him still, but it was a hollow fear now, the kind that comes from knowing that the thing you fear is dying, and Maegor knew it too, though he would never admit it aloud. His reign was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The news of Jaehaerys' gathering army reached King's Landing in the autumn of 48 NAC. The young prince had established himself at Old Town under the protection of House Hightower, there, in the shadow of the Citadel and the Starry Sept. He had been proclaimed the true king by a gathering of lords from the Reach, the Stormlands, and even some from the Riverlands. They called him Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, a name that spoke to his intentions. He did not come seeking vengeance or conquest. He came to heal, to restore order, to give the realm a king it could love instead of fear. The contrast with Maegor could not have been more stark. Maegor's response was predictable. He declared Jaehaerys a traitor and a pretender. He called on his loyal lords to bring him the boy's head. He promised rewards and titles to anyone who would fight for him. But the ravens he sent went mostly unanswered. Of the great houses, only a handful remained truly loyal. House Lannister stayed neutral, waiting to see which way the war would turn before committing. House Stark in the north sent polite refusals, claiming they had problems of their own and could not spare men for southern quarrels. House Baratheon threw in with Jaehaerys immediately, remembering the Storm King, who had been slain by Aegon the Conqueror, and seeing in the young prince a chance for a better future. Even the Crownlands, the traditional heartland of Targaryen power, wavered. Some houses sent token forces to King's Landing. Others sent nothing at all. The truth was that Maegor had ruled through fear for too long, and fear, unlike loyalty, vanishes the moment the thing feared appears weak. And Maegor was weak now, even if he refused to see it. He had no heirs. He had no allies he could truly trust. He had burned too many bridges, executed too many lords, and alienated too many powerful houses. The realm did not rise against him out of courage. It rose against him because it sensed that he was vulnerable, and that this might be the only chance they would ever have to be rid of him. Still, Maegor was not without resources. He had Balerion, the greatest dragon in the world. He had the Red Keep, a fortress that could withstand any siege. And he had his own terrible will, that iron determination that had carried him through exile and war and betrayal. If Jaehaerys wanted the throne, Maegor would make him pay for it in blood. He began to fortify King's Landing, calling in what troops he could and preparing for a siege. He ordered the gates strengthened and the walls repaired. He had scorpions, massive crossbows designed to kill dragons, installed on the towers, and he waited, daring his nephew to come. Jaehaerys did come, but not in the way Maegor expected. The young prince did not march his army directly to King's Landing. Instead, he moved carefully, methodically, securing his position in the south first. He visited the great houses personally on Dragonback, landing in their courtyards and speaking with their lords face to face. He promised peace. He promised justice. He promised an end to the terror that had defined Maegor's reign. And everywhere he went, lords bent the knee, not out of fear, but out of hope. They wanted to believe that this young man, with his kind eyes and his gentle words, could heal the wounds that Maegor had inflicted. It was a masterful campaign, not of military conquest, but of political persuasion. And it worked. By the time Jaehaerys turned his eyes toward King's Landing, he had the support of most of the realm. His army numbered in the tens of thousands, drawn from every corner of the 7 kingdoms. More importantly, he had legitimacy. The lords had chosen him not because he was strong or cruel, but because he was Aenys's rightful heir, and because he represented everything Maegor was not. Gentle where Maegor was harsh, merciful where Maegor was ruthless, loved where Maegor was feared. The confrontation everyone anticipated, the great battle between uncle and nephew, between Balerion and Vermithor never came, because before Jaehaerys could reach King's Landing, something else happened that changed everything. Lords who had remained neutral suddenly declared for Jaehaerys. Garrisons that had been holding cities in Maegor's name opened their gates to the young prince's forces without resistance. And most devastating of all, men began to desert from Maegor's own army. Knights and soldiers who had sworn to defend the capital slipped away in the night, taking their weapons and their horses and vanishing into the countryside. By the time Jaehaerys' vanguard appeared on the horizon, Maegor's forces had dwindled to less than 1,000 men. It was not enough to hold the city. It was barely enough to hold the Red Keep. Maegor stood on the battlements and watched the enemy banners approach. Black dragons on red fields, the same symbol he wore on his own banners, the same blood, the same house, and yet they came to destroy him. He felt something then that he had not felt in years. Not fear exactly, but something close to it, a recognition that he had lost, that this war was over before it had truly begun. But Maegor was not a man who surrendered. If he was going to fall, he would fall fighting. He would die as he had lived, with blood on his hands and fire in his heart. He called his remaining forces together in the throne room. They looked up at him, these few hundred men who had stayed loyal to the end. Some were true believers, men who thought Maegor was the strong king the realm needed. Others were simply mercenaries who had nowhere else to go. And a few were madmen who enjoyed the chaos and the cruelty. Maegor looked at them and saw not an army but a collection of broken pieces. Still, they were all he had. Jaehaerys comes, he told them. He thinks he can take my throne with words and promises. He thinks the realm will simply hand him the crown because he smiles and speaks softly. Show him he is wrong. Show him that the Iron Throne is not won with kindness. It is won with steel. The men roared their approval, but it was a hollow sound, echoing in the vast empty chamber. They knew as well as Maegor did that they could not win, but they would fight anyway, because fighting was all they knew. Maegor dismissed them and climbed the steps to the Iron Throne. He sat, feeling the sharp edges of the swords press against his back and arms. The throne had cut him many times over the years, drawing blood whenever he moved too carelessly. Some said it was a sign that the throne rejected him, that he was not meant to rule. Maegor had always dismissed such talk as superstition. But now, sitting alone in the silent throne room, he wondered if there was truth to it. Had the throne ever truly accepted him? Or had he been fighting against it all along, forcing himself into a seat that was never meant to be his? Outside the Red Keep, the city of King's Landing prepared for war. But it was a strange preparation. Shopkeepers boarded up their windows, not to protect against looters, but to hide while the fighting passed. Small folk fled to the septs, praying for protection. And the city watch, those men sworn to keep order in the capital, quietly began to discuss what they would do when Jaehaerys arrived. Would they fight for Maegor? Or would they open the gates and welcome the new king? The captain of the watch, a grizzled veteran who had served 3 kings, made the decision for them. "We serve the realm," he told his men, "not the man on the throne. When Jaehaerys comes, we stand aside." The lords still in King's Landing heard of this decision and made their own choices. Some fled the city entirely, not wanting to be caught in whatever bloodbath was coming. Others sent secret messages to Jaehaerys, pledging their loyalty and begging for mercy, and a very few, the most loyal or the most foolish, armed their household guards and prepared to stand with Maegor until the end. Among these was Lord Towers, an older man who had fought in the war against the faith and still believed in the strength of a House Targaryen, even if he questioned Maegor's methods. He came to the Red Keep and knelt before the king. "I will stand with you," he said, "whatever comes." Maegor looked at him for a long moment and then nodded. "You are a braver man than most," he said, "or a greater fool. We shall see which." In his chambers that night, Maegor did something he had not done in years. He wrote a letter, not a proclamation or a decree, but a personal message. He wrote to his sister wife Rhaena, the woman he had forced to marry him after killing her husband. "You wanted this," he wrote. "You and your brother. You have won. But know that what comes next is on your heads as much as mine. The realm thinks Jaehaerys will be better than me. They think kindness will hold the 7 kingdoms together. They are wrong. And when they realize it, they will remember me. Not as a monster, but as a necessity. Enjoy your victory while it lasts." He sealed the letter and gave it to a servant to deliver. Whether Rhaena ever received it, no one knows. The next morning brought news that made even Maegor's iron composure crack. 3 of his Kingsguard, men sworn to protect him unto death, had deserted in the night. They had taken their white cloaks and their honor and fled the city, leaving only a note saying they could no longer serve a king who had lost the blessing of gods and men. Maegor read the note and crumpled it in his fist. He did not rage. He did not curse. He simply stood in silence, feeling the walls close in around him. He had 4 Kingsguard left now, 4 men against an army. It was almost laughable, but Maegor did not laugh. He walked to the window of his chambers and looked out over the city. Smoke rose from a dozen places where nervous citizens had started fires, either by accident or out of spite. The streets were nearly empty, and on the horizon he could see the dust clouds raised by marching armies. Jaehaerys was close now, perhaps a day away, perhaps less. Soon, very soon, this would all be over. Maegor turned away from the window and looked at Dark Sister, resting against the wall. He picked up the blade and felt its familiar weight. Visenya had carried this sword into battle 100 times. She had been fiercer than any man, more ruthless than any king. She would have been ashamed to see how her son's reign had ended, brought low not by dragons or armies, but by the simple refusal of the realm to obey. Or perhaps she would have understood. Perhaps she would have told him that power, no matter how it is won, must eventually be given freely, or it crumbles to dust. He would never know. Visenya was dead, gone these 5 years, and Maegor was alone. That night, as Jaehaerys' army made camp outside the city, Maegor sat in the throne room one last time. He did not sleep. He simply sat on the Iron Throne, surrounded by shadows and silence, and waited for the dawn. He knew what was coming. He knew he could not stop it, but he would face it on his own terms, seated on the throne he had taken by force and held through terror. He would not run. He would not hide. He would remain king until the very end, even if that end came tomorrow. And in the darkness of the throne room, with only the distant sound of the city's uneasy breathing for company, Maegor the Cruel prepared to meet his fate. Dawn came to King's Landing with an eerie stillness. The city, which should have been waking to the sounds of merchants and craftsmen beginning their day, lay silent as a tomb. The small folk huddled in their homes, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. On the walls, guards stood at their posts, but their eyes turned more often toward the Red Keep than toward the approaching army. They were waiting for orders that never came, waiting for a king who had retreated into silence. Jaehaerys Targaryen arrived at the gates of King's Landing as the sun climbed above the horizon. He rode at the head of his army, mounted on a white horse, his silver hair catching the morning light. Behind him stretched thousands of men, their banners a sea of colors representing every corner of the realm. But Jaehaerys did not come with fire and fury. He came with a herald who rode forward alone, carrying a white banner of peace. The herald stopped before the city gates and called out in a voice that echoed across the empty streets. Prince Jaehaerys, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, calls upon his uncle King Maegor to surrender. Yield the crown peacefully, and you will be permitted to take the Black and live out your days at the wall. Refuse, and the city will be taken by force, and no mercy will be shown. The gates did not open. No answer came from the walls. The herald waited for an hour, his white banner fluttering in the breeze, and then he returned to Jaehaerys and shook his head. "No response, my prince," he said. Jaehaerys nodded slowly. He had expected this. Maegor was many things, but he was not a man who surrendered. The young prince turned to Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, who rode beside him. "We give him until midday," Jaehaerys said. "If he does not respond by then, we enter the city." Rhaegar nodded, but there was concern in his eyes. "And if he takes to the sky on Balerion?" he asked. "If he burns the city rather than lose it?" Jaehaerys' face hardened. "Then I will meet him in the air," he said. "Vermithor and I will end this." But the hours passed, and Balerion did not rise. The great black dragon remained in his lair beneath the Red Keep, as silent and still as his rider. The city waited, the army waited, and in the throne room, Maegor sat motionless on the Iron Throne, his eyes fixed on the great doors, waiting for them to burst open. His remaining Kingsguard stood at the base of the throne, 4 men in white cloaks, their hands on their swords. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. When midday came, and still no answer had been given, Jaehaerys gave the order. The gates of King's Landing opened from within. The city watch, true to their captain's word, had chosen the realm over the king. They unbarred the massive doors and stood aside as Jaehaerys' army entered. There was no fighting in the streets, no resistance. The people of King's Landing simply watched as thousands of soldiers marched through their city, heading for the Red Keep. Some cheered, others wept. Most simply stood in silence, too exhausted and too beaten down by years of terror to know how to feel. Jaehaerys rode through the streets slowly, taking in the damage that years of Maegor's reign had inflicted. Buildings stood empty, their owners fled or dead. The great sept that had once dominated the city square was a blackened ruin, burned during the war with the faith. Beggars lined the streets, men and women who had lost everything in the fighting or the purges. Children with hollow eyes watched the soldiers pass, too hungry and too broken to even beg. This was Maegor's legacy, Jaehaerys thought. Not strength, not order, just ruin and suffering. The army surrounded the Red Keep. Jaehaerys dismounted and walked to the gates alone, leaving his guards behind. It was a risk, but he wanted to show that he came in peace. that he did not seek unnecessary bloodshed. The gates of the Red Keep stood closed and barred. Jaehaerys called out, his voice strong and clear. "Uncle, I am here. I have come to claim what is mine by right. Open the gates and surrender. No more blood needs to be spilled today. You have fought bravely and ruled as you thought best. But your time is over. Let it end with dignity." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, the gates began to open, not thrown wide in welcome, but creaking open just enough for a single man to pass through. One of Maegor's Kingsguard emerged, his white cloak stained and his face weary. He approached Jaehaerys and knelt. "Prince Jaehaerys," he said, his voice rough, "the king awaits you in the throne room. He bids you come alone." Jaehaerys studied the night for a moment, then nodded. "I will come," he said. Behind him, Lord Rhaegar started to protest, but Jaehaerys raised a hand. "This is between family," he said quietly. "I must face him alone." Jaehaerys walked through the gates of the Red Keep and into the courtyard. The castle was nearly deserted. A few servants peered from windows, but they quickly vanished when they saw him. The young prince crossed the yard and entered the main keep, his footsteps echoing on the stone floors. He knew the way to the throne room. He had been here before, years ago, when his father Aenys still lived. The memories came flooding back. Happier times, simpler times, before the faith rose, before Maegor took the throne, before everything fell apart. The doors to the throne room stood open. Jaehaerys paused at the threshold, gathering his courage, and then stepped inside. The chamber was vast and shadowy, lit only by the light filtering through high windows. And there, at the far end, sat Maegor Targaryen on the Iron Throne. He had not moved since the night before. He sat with his hands resting on the arms of the throne, Dark Sister laid across his lap, his eyes fixed on the approaching prince. The 4 remaining Kingsguard stood at the base of the throne, their faces hidden beneath their helmets. Jaehaerys walked slowly down the length of the hall, his boots clicking on the stone. He stopped about 20 paces from the throne and looked up at his uncle. Maegor looked older than Jaehaerys remembered. His face was lined with exhaustion. His eyes, once burning with fury, now seemed hollow and distant. But there was still strength in him, a terrible, resilient strength that had carried him through exile and war and betrayal. "Uncle," Jaehaerys said, his voice steady, "it is over. The realm has chosen. Will you yield?" Maegor did not answer immediately. He simply stared at his nephew, this boy who dared to claim the throne, and something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "You think you have won," Maegor said finally, his voice a low rumble. "You think that because lords kneel to you and small folk cheer your name, you have proven yourself worthy of this throne. You are a fool, boy. You know nothing of what it takes to rule." Jaehaerys felt anger flash through him, but he forced it down. "I know enough to understand that a king who rules through fear alone will eventually have no one left to rule," he said. "You burned the realm trying to hold it together. You killed anyone who questioned you. You turned the faith against us and made enemies of our own people. That is not strength, uncle. That is madness." Maegor's eyes narrowed. "And what will you do differently?" he demanded. "Will you smile and forgive and hope that kindness will bind the 7 kingdoms? Will you let the lords do as they please, raising their own armies and pursuing their own ambitions? Will you allow the faith to regain its power to once again threaten our house? He leaned forward, and the throne creaked beneath him. You will fail, Jaehaerys. You are too soft, too gentle. The realm needs an iron hand, and you do not have one. Within a year, they will be laughing at you. Within 5, they will be plotting against you. And within 10, another war will come. And this time, House Targaryen may not survive it. Jaehaerys listened to these words and felt their weight. Part of him wondered if Maegor was right. Part of him feared that kindness and mercy would indeed be seen as weakness. But he also knew that Maegor's way had failed. The realm was broken, the people were suffering, and the Targaryen dynasty, which should have been the strongest force in Westeros, was hated and feared instead of respected. Perhaps I will fail, Jaehaerys said quietly, but I would rather fail trying to be just than succeed through cruelty. I would rather be remembered as a king who cared for his people than one who made them weep. And if that makes me weak in your eyes, so be it. Maegor stared at him for a long moment, and then he laughed. It was not a bitter laugh or a mocking one. It was almost sad, filled with a kind of weary resignation. You sound like your father, he said. Aenys believed the same things. He thought love would be enough. Look where it got him. Dead and unmourned, his children scattered, his kingdom in flames. He stood slowly, and the king's guard tensed, their hands moving to their sword hilts. Maegor ignored them. He lifted Dark Sister and looked at the blade, the Valyrian steel gleaming in the dim light. I have carried this sword since my mother gave it to me, he said. I have killed men with it. Good men and bad men, loyal men and traitors. I have done terrible things in the name of this throne. And for what? So that a boy could walk into my hall and tell me it was all for nothing. He looked at Jaehaerys, and for the first time, the young prince saw something in his uncle's eyes that he had never expected to see. Not rage, not hatred, but exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that came from years of fighting, years of betrayal, years of isolation. Maegor was tired of war, tired of ruling, tired of being Maegor the Cruel. I will not yield, he said quietly. I cannot. To yield would be to admit that everything I have done was wrong, that every man I killed, every sept I burned, every choice I made was a mistake. I cannot carry that burden. He raised Dark Sister, holding it in both hands. So if you want this throne, nephew, you will have to take it from me. Jaehaerys drew his own sword, a simple blade of castle-forged steel. I do not want to kill you, uncle, he said, but I will if I must. The king's guard moved to intervene, but Maegor raised a hand. Stand down, he ordered. This is between me and him. The knights hesitated, torn between their oaths and their sense of reality. Finally, one by one, they stepped back. They would not interfere. This was the king's choice, and they would respect it. Maegor descended the steps of the Iron Throne slowly, his sword held ready. Jaehaerys stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been trained in combat, but Maegor was a legendary warrior, a man who had fought in 100 battles and never lost. This would not be an easy fight. It might not even be a fair one, but it was necessary. The old had to fall before the new could rise. They circled each other in the center of the throne room, 2 dragons preparing to strike. And then Maegor attacked. He moved with surprising speed for a man his size, Dark Sister flashing through the air in a deadly arc. Jaehaerys barely managed to block, the impact sending shockwaves up his arms. Maegor pressed the attack, his blows heavy and relentless, driving Jaehaerys back step by step. The young prince defended desperately, his sword ringing against Dark Sister again and again. But as the fight continued, Jaehaerys began to notice something. Maegor's attacks, though powerful, were slowing. His breathing was labored. Sweat poured down his face despite the coolness of the hall. He was not the unstoppable warrior of legend. He was a man worn down by age and stress and countless wounds, both physical and otherwise. Jaehaerys saw his opening and took it, stepping inside Maegor's guard and slamming his shoulder into the older man's chest. Maegor staggered backward, and Jaehaerys brought his sword around in a sweeping strike that should have ended the fight. But Maegor was not finished yet. He twisted at the last moment, avoiding the killing blow, and countered with a strike of his own. Dark Sister caught Jaehaerys across the arm, opening a deep gash that sent blood flowing. Jaehaerys gasped in pain, but did not fall. He backed away, switching his sword to his other hand, and prepared for another exchange. Maegor advanced again, but this time his steps were unsteady. He stumbled, catching himself on one knee, and Jaehaerys saw the truth. His uncle was not just tired, he was dying, not from any wound Jaehaerys had inflicted, but from something else, something inside him that had finally given way. Maegor looked up at his nephew, blood trickling from his mouth. When had he started bleeding? He did not know. Perhaps it had been happening for days, weeks even, and he simply had not noticed. Or perhaps the throne itself had finally taken its toll, those 1,000 sharp edges cutting him one last time. He tried to stand, to raise Dark Sister for another attack, but his strength was gone. The sword fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered on the stone floor. Maegor swayed, and then he fell forward, collapsing onto his face. Jaehaerys rushed forward, dropping his own sword, and knelt beside his uncle. He turned Maegor over, cradling the older man's head. "Uncle," he said urgently. "Uncle, stay with me." But Maegor's eyes were already glazing over. He looked up at Jaehaerys and smiled, a strange, peaceful smile that seemed completely out of place on his cruel features. "You were right," he whispered. "It was all for nothing." And then he was gone. Maegor Targaryen, the third king to sit the Iron Throne, died not in glorious battle or dramatic suicide, but simply from exhaustion and despair, his body finally giving up after years of abuse and stress. Jaehaerys knelt there for a long time, holding his dead uncle in his arms, and he wept. Not for the man Maegor had been, but for what he might have been, for the waste of it all, for the thousands who had died needlessly, for the realm that had suffered under his rule, and for the tragic truth that sometimes the strong are not the ones who endure, but the ones who break first. The Kingsguard approached slowly, their faces hidden beneath their helmets, and one of them spoke. "The king is dead," he said quietly. "Long live King Jaehaerys." Jaehaerys looked up at them, his face wet with tears, and nodded. "Long live the king," he repeated, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. The news of Maegor's death spread through the Red Keep, and then through the city with the speed of wildfire. The small folk poured into the streets, not celebrating exactly, but exhaling. The nightmare was over. The tyrant was gone. Within hours, bells were ringing throughout King's Landing, and within days, ravens were flying to every corner of the realm, carrying the news. Maegor the Cruel was dead. Jaehaerys the Conciliator was king. But even as the realm began to breathe easier, questions remained. How exactly had Maegor died? Some claimed they had seen him fighting Jaehaerys in single combat. Others said he had been found alone in the throne room, already dead, sitting on the Iron Throne with no marks upon him. The Maesters examined his body and found nothing conclusive. No poison, no obvious wounds beyond the countless scars he had accumulated over a lifetime of war. They concluded, somewhat unsatisfactorily, that his heart had simply given out, unable to bear the weight of his reign any longer. But the small folk and the singers preferred more dramatic explanations. Some said the Iron Throne itself had killed him, that the swords had come alive and pierced him with 1,000 cuts as punishment for his sins. Others claimed he had taken his own life rather than face defeat, drinking poison or opening his veins in the privacy of his chambers. Still others whispered that dark magic had been involved, that Tyanna's ghost had returned to claim vengeance, or that the gods themselves had reached down and stopped his heart. The truth, as is often the case, was probably simpler and sadder than any of the legends. Maegor had been a strong man once, perhaps the strongest of his generation, but years of war, of constant vigilance, of sleeping with a sword by his side and poison tasters at every meal had worn him down. The stress of ruling a realm that hated him, the paranoia that infected every moment of his life, the betrayal of wives and allies, and even his own body's failure to produce heirs, all of it had taken its toll. In the end, Maegor the Cruel died, not because he was weak, but because even iron, when bent too far for too long, will eventually break. Jaehaerys ordered that his uncle be given a proper funeral, despite protests from many lords who wanted Maegor's body fed to dogs or thrown into the sea. He was still a Targaryen, Jaehaerys said firmly. He was still family. We will honor that, even if we cannot honor what he did. And so Maegor was burned in the traditional manner of his house, his body placed upon a pyre along with Dark Sister and set aflame by Vermithor's breath. Thousands watched as the smoke rose into the sky, carrying the remains of the king who had tried to rule through fear. In the days that followed, Jaehaerys set about the difficult task of healing the realm. He pardoned most of those who had fought against him, understanding that they had been caught between two impossible choices. He made peace with the faith, promising to respect their authority in spiritual matters while maintaining the crown's temporal power. He invited the High Septon to the Red Keep for negotiations, and together they crafted a settlement that would allow both institutions to coexist. The faith agreed to dissolve the Faith Militant permanently, acknowledging that armed holy warriors had no place in a peaceful realm. In return, Jaehaerys agreed to accept the faith's teachings on marriage and to not take multiple wives as his uncle had done. He also dealt with the question of Maegor's surviving wife, Rhaena. She had been a prisoner as much as a queen, forced into a marriage she never wanted. Jaehaerys freed her from any obligation and offered her a place of honor at court. Rhaena accepted, grateful beyond words, and she became one of her brother's most trusted advisors. Together, they worked to rebuild what Maegor had broken. But even as Jaehaerys succeeded where his uncle had failed, even as the realm began to prosper under his gentle rule, the shadow of Maegor lingered. The things he had done could not be undone. The people he had killed could not be brought back. And the laws and precedents he had established, some of them at least, remained in force. Maegor had proven that the Targaryen dynasty could survive even the worst of rulers, but only barely. He had shown that dragons alone were not enough to hold the realm together. That fear could accomplish much in the short term, but nothing in the long run. And that cruelty, no matter how justified its practitioners might believe it to be, eventually consumes both the cruel and their kingdoms. In later years, when singers told the tale of Maegor the Cruel, they always ended with a question. Was he a monster who deserved his fate? Or was he a product of his time, shaped by the brutal world he was born into? The answer, like so much in the history of Westeros, depended on who was asking and what they wanted to believe. Some saw him as a necessary evil, a man who did terrible things but ultimately strengthened House Targaryen by breaking the faith's power. Others saw him as a cautionary tale, a warning of what happens when power is pursued without wisdom or mercy. The masters, who record such things, took a different view. They noted that Maegor's reign, though short and bloody, had lasting effects on Westerosi law and custom. His construction of the Red Keep and Maegor's holdfast gave the Iron Throne a fortress worthy of its name. His defeat of the Faith Militant ensured that no religious order would ever again challenge the crown militarily, and his failure to produce heirs made it clear to future Targaryens that the succession must be carefully managed, that simply being strong was not enough to guarantee the dynasty's survival. But perhaps the most important legacy of Maegor the Cruel was this. He showed the realm what a Targaryen king should not be, and in doing so, he made it possible for Jaehaerys and his successors to be better. The contrast was stark. Where Maegor had burned, Jaehaerys built. Where Maegor had killed, Jaehaerys pardoned. Where Maegor had inspired fear, Jaehaerys inspired love. And for 55 years, Jaehaerys ruled wisely and well, his reign remembered as one of the greatest in Westerosi history. Still, there were moments, particularly in times of crisis, when lords and common folk alike would remember Maegor. When enemies threatened the realm, some would whisper that perhaps what Westeros needed was not another Jaehaerys, but another Maegor, someone willing to do the hard things, someone willing to make the cruel choices, someone willing to rule through fear, if that was what it took to survive. These whispers were always quickly silenced, but they never entirely disappeared, because deep down, everyone knew the truth. Power requires both the carrot and the stick, both mercy and strength, both love and fear. And while Jaehaerys had proven that a king could rule with kindness, Maegor had proven that sometimes, in the darkest hours, kindness was not enough. And so the memory of Maegor the Cruel lived on, not celebrated, but not entirely forgotten either. A dark chapter in the history of House Targaryen, a reminder of what could go wrong when power corrupted absolutely, and a warning to future generations that the price of the crown was not just gold and glory, but blood and suffering, and sometimes the very soul of the one who wore it. If you've walked through the entire life of Maegor Targaryen, from his violent birth to his mysterious death, you've seen a man shaped by fire and broken by his own ambition, a king who thought strength alone could hold a kingdom together, only to discover too late that fear has a limited shelf life. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Maegor was a necessary evil who saved House Targaryen from the faith? Or was he simply a tyrant whose cruelty nearly destroyed everything his father built? And if you want more deep dives into the forgotten corners of Westeros, into the kings and queens and warriors whose choices shape the Seven Kingdoms, make sure to subscribe. There are more stories to tell, more legends to explore, and more truths waiting to be uncovered in the world of ice and fire.